They seized his accounts. A federal judge reached into the financial core of Donald Trump's empire, looked at what was inside, and what he found doesn't just change the Trump story, it changes the story America has been telling itself for 40 years. We are talking about a sitting former president, a man actively running for power again, whose business empire has now been placed under court control, not investigated, not audited, controlled. A judge now has more authority over Trump's money than Trump does. Let that land. The self-proclaimed greatest businessman in American history cannot move his own money without asking a judge for permission. And the reason why, the reason buried in those court documents, is something every single American deserves to hear clearly, loudly, and without the political spin that usually smothers stories like this one. This is U.S. Focus, and today we are not pulling a single punch. If this kind of unfiltered, evidence-based accountability journalism matters to you, if you believe Americans deserve the truth without the noise, then hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because what we're covering today is just the beginning of a story that is going to keep unfolding for months, and you need to be here for every chapter. Let's start at the foundation, because nothing that happened in that courtroom makes sense unless you understand how Donald Trump actually built his so-called empire. And the answer, when you strip away the gold-plated lobbies and the reality of television bravado, is surprisingly simple. He built it on paper, not on genius, not on superior deal-making, on paper, specifically on the numbers written on that paper and the ability to make those numbers say whatever was most convenient at any given moment. Here is how it worked, and pay attention because this is the heart of everything. The Trump Organization maintained what are called statements of financial condition. These are annual documents that tell banks, insurance companies, and business partners how much Trump is worth and how much his properties are valued at. They sound boring. They are anything but. Because according to years of court findings, these documents were systematically manipulated to serve whatever purpose Trump needed them to serve at that exact moment. When Trump needed a big loan from a bank, those documents showed properties worth enormous sums, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars more than independent appraisers would value them. The numbers were inflated, padded, massaged to make Trump look wealthier and more creditworthy than he actually was. Banks saw those numbers and said, sure, we'll lend you money at better rates because you look like a solid bet. That's fraud. That is textbook financial fraud, and it was happening not once, not twice, but systematically across years and across multiple properties. Then, when tax season came around, the same properties that were worth a fortune for loan purposes suddenly shrank in value. The same buildings, the same golf courses, the same towers with his name in gold letters, suddenly they were worth far less, which meant Trump paid far less in taxes than someone whose books actually reflected reality. And here's the part that should make your blood boil. This wasn't sloppy accounting. It wasn't one rogue employee making a mistake. This was an organizational pattern. Internal documents, emails, testimony from insiders, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. This is how the Trump Organization operated. This was the business model. Think about what that means for every American who pays their taxes honestly, who doesn't have an army of lawyers to find creative ways to minimize their obligations. You are playing by rules that Trump apparently decided did not apply to him. The man who ran on the promise of bringing business brilliance to the White House was running a financial operation that only worked because it was lying to the very institutions it depended on. That is not genius. That is not deal-making. That is fraud. And a court of law said exactly that. Now let's talk about how this all came apart. Because the story of New York Attorney General Leticia James building this case is one of the most important accountability stories in modern American legal history, and it deserves to be told without the dismissive spin that Trump's team has tried to wrap around it for years. Leticia James did not wake up one morning and decide to go after Trump for political reasons. She followed a paper trail, a long, detailed, meticulously documented paper trail that stretched back decades and ran through hundreds of transactions, dozens of properties, and thousands of internal documents that the Trump Organization could not make disappear. The case was built on specifics, not allegations, not theories, but concrete evidence showing specific properties being valued at wildly different amounts depending on what Trump needed at that moment. Mar-a-Lago was valued at over $500 million in some loan documents while being assessed at a fraction of that for other purposes. Trump's New York triplex apartment was listed at nearly 3 times its actual square footage in financial statements. A factual error so large it strains every definition of the word mistake. Golf courses were assigned values that had no grounding in any legitimate appraisal methodology, and at every step, the documentation showed people at the top of the organization knew exactly what was happening. Judge Arthur Engoron's original ruling was not a slap on the wrist. It was a sledgehammer. Over $450 million in penalties plus interest, one of the largest civil fraud judgments in New York history. And when Trump's team scrambled to appeal, the appellate court did reduce the penalty, calling it excessive in scale. But here is the part that gets buried every time the headline focuses on the reduced number. The appellate court upheld the core finding. The fraud happened. The systematic misrepresentation was real. A court of law affirmed that the Trump organization operated through a pattern of financial deception. That finding does not disappear. That label does not come off. You can argue about the dollar amount. You can debate the appropriate penalty, but you cannot argue away the core ruling that found systematic fraud at the heart of one of the most famous business brands in American history. That is a legal fact, and it is the foundation upon which everything that came after, the asset freeze, the bond crisis, the court-appointed monitors, is built. This was not a political hit job. This was evidence presented in court, evaluated by a judge, and found to be credible enough to justify one of the most dramatic business judgments in decades. The paper trail didn't lie. The numbers told the truth that Trump spent years trying to hide. Here is where the story stops being a legal drama and starts being something far more revealing about the true state of Trump's finances. When Judge Engoron issued his original ruling, Trump had the option that every defendant in a civil case has minus post bond while you appeal the decision. It's a standard legal mechanism. You put up the money or something equivalent to it, and the enforcement of the judgment is paused while the higher courts take a look. Simple, standard, and for a man who has spent decades telling the world he is worth billions of dollars, it should have been straightforward. It wasn't. It was a disaster. Trump's legal team approached bond company after bond company on Wall Street. These are firms whose entire business model is built around evaluating financial risk and deciding whether someone is good for the money they claim to have. They are not political. They are not ideological. They are actuarial. They look at the numbers, they calculate the risk, and they either write the bond or they don't. And firm after firm after firm looked at Donald Trump's books and said no. Some reportedly required more collateral than Trump could provide in cash or liquid assets. Others simply walked away. The man who claimed to be worth billions of dollars could not find a single professional financial institution willing to back his ability to pay a judgment that, while large, should have been manageable for a genuine multi-billionaire. Think about what that tells you. These are not Trump's political enemies. These are not radical left-wing activists. These are Wall Street risk professionals whose job is to make money by correctly evaluating who can cover their obligations. When they look at Trump's actual financial picture, not the inflated statements used for loans, not the press releases about his supposed net worth, but the real books, and they say, we're not comfortable. That is one of the most damning assessments a businessman can receive. It means the people who do this for a living don't believe the numbers add up. Eventually, a bond was secured after the appellate court reduced the penalty, but the damage was already done. The world had seen the spectacle of the self-proclaimed billionaire scrambling to find someone, anyone, willing to back him. It exposed something that financial observers had suspected for years, but that the media had largely let Trump paper over with his own braggadocio. The gap between the Trump that exists in press releases and the Trump that exists in actual financial reality may be far, far wider than anyone outside his inner circle fully understood. And now, thanks to this court process, The rest of the world is starting to catch up to what the numbers were always trying to say. Now we get to the part of this story that is almost impossible to fully grasp unless you slow down and think about what it actually means in practice. A federal judge has placed Donald Trump's business empire under court control. Not investigated, not audited, controlled. Every significant asset the Trump organization owns, and we are talking about an enormous portfolio, is now subject to court oversight and restriction. Trump Tower in Manhattan, one of the most recognizable buildings in New York City with his name in 6-foot gold letters on the facade. Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, the property he turned into his personal residence and political headquarters after leaving the White House. His hotels in Washington and Chicago, his golf courses in New Jersey, Florida, Scotland, Ireland, properties in multiple countries carrying his name and his brand. All of it is now operating under conditions that no legitimate business empire should ever have to operate under. He cannot sell a property without court approval. He cannot use his assets as collateral to secure new financing. He cannot transfer ownership to his children or restructure through shell companies to protect the assets. He cannot move money between accounts in ways that might shield it from the judgment. Court-appointed monitors are watching transactions. Every significant financial decision now requires sign-off from people who answer to the court, not to Trump. The man who built a brand around being the ultimate boss, who literally made "you're fired" a cultural catchphrase, now has to ask permission from a judge to run his own company. And if the financial situation deteriorates further, if appeals fail and penalties come due that cannot be covered, court-appointed receivers could step in and begin selling off assets piece by piece to satisfy the judgment. That means strangers with legal authority could be deciding which Trump property gets auctioned off first, what price is acceptable, and where the money goes. The man who spent 40 years building an empire with his name on everything could watch pieces of that empire get sold off by people he cannot fire, cannot intimidate, and cannot negotiate away. This is not a scenario from a political opponent's fever dream. This is the documented legal reality of where the Trump organization stands right now. And it matters not just because of what it says about Trump, but because of what it says about the myth that was sold to the American public for decades, the myth of the infallible businessman whose success was so undeniable that it qualified him for the highest office in the world. We are halfway through the story, and it only gets more consequential from here. If you are watching this and thinking someone in your life needs to see this, a family member, a friend, a coworker who still believes the billionaire myth, share this video right now. The truth doesn't spread itself. We have to carry it. Let's talk about what this does to the brand, because the brand is the whole game for Donald Trump. It always has been, long before he ran for president, before The Apprentice, before the rallies and the red hats. Donald Trump was a brand. The towers and the gold and the lifestyle and the name, all of it was carefully constructed to communicate one thing: this man is a winner. This man is successful beyond measure. If you associate with him, if you trust him with your money, if you vote for him with your ballot, you are aligning yourself with success. That brand is now in serious trouble in ways it has never been before. Previous scandals, previous bankruptcies, previous lawsuits. Trump always found a way to spin those as evidence of his resilience, his fighter's spirit, his willingness to take risks that lesser men couldn't handle. 6 bankruptcies became proof that he understood how to use the system. Failed businesses became proof that he wasn't afraid to try. There was always a spin available, but a court ruling that upholds systematic fraud, a moment where Wall Street professionals publicly decline to back him, an asset freeze that strips away the control he built his identity around. The spin machine is running at full speed, but the damage is happening faster than the spin can cover it. Donors are watching this. The big money donors who write 6- and 7-figure checks to political campaigns are not idealists. They are transactional. They write checks to people they believe can win and to people they believe will be useful. When those donors see that the man they backed cannot post bond on his own, when they see a court ruling that his business operation was systematically fraudulent, they start doing math. They start wondering whether they are investing in a winner or subsidizing the legal bills of a collapsing empire. Some of them will stay, some of them will send money specifically because they see Trump as a martyr being persecuted, but some of them, the quiet ones, the ones who made their money by being unsentimental about risk, are going to quietly back away. The political fallout is equally brutal. Trump's entire pitch to the American voter, especially the independent voter who swings elections, was always rooted in the business mythology. He couldn't run as a lifelong politician because he wasn't one. He couldn't run on policy expertise because he didn't have it in the traditional sense. He ran on the idea that he was a successful businessman who could bring that success to the management of the country. That argument is now being systematically dismantled in open court every time Trump tries to talk about economic competence, about fiscal responsibility, about running America like a business. His opponents have a ready answer. A court of law ruled that his business operation was built on systematic fraud. That is not a political attack. That is a legal finding. And it is devastating. So where does this go from here? What are Trump's actual options? And what does the long arc of this story look like for the man, the brand, and the country? Because this is not just a story about one person's legal troubles. This is a story about accountability, about whether the rules that govern every ordinary American actually apply to people at the very top of the power structure. And the answer to that question has consequences that go far beyond Donald Trump. His legal options are limited and slow. He can continue appealing, hoping that higher courts find additional reasons to reduce or eliminate the remaining penalties. That process takes years. During those years, the asset freeze and court oversight remain in place. He can try to negotiate settlements that reduce his financial exposure, but that requires the other side being willing to negotiate, and there is no particular reason why New York's Attorney General, who built this case brick by brick over years, would accept a deal that lets Trump walk away without real consequences. He can try to raise cash through legitimate business deals, but the court restrictions on his assets make that extraordinarily difficult, and the fraud findings make potential partners nervous. What he will definitely do, because it is the only play in his playbook that has always worked, is turn this into a fundraising operation. He will tell his base that the deep state is trying to destroy him because they fear his power. He will frame every court ruling as political persecution. He will send urgent emails at midnight asking supporters to chip in $10 to help him fight the radical left, and it will work, at least partially. A significant portion of his base is conditioned to respond to that message, and money will flow, but even that has a ceiling when the fundraising emails are explicitly about covering legal bills for a billionaire who can't post his own bonds. Some donors eventually start asking uncomfortable questions about where their money is actually going and whether it is accomplishing anything beyond keeping the legal fight alive. The legacy question is the deepest one, and it is the one that history will ultimately answer, regardless of what happens in the next election cycle or the next courtroom. Donald Trump spent 40 years building a brand around a very specific claim that he was the greatest businessman of his generation, a deal maker without peer, a man whose financial instincts were so superior that they qualified him to lead the most powerful country on earth. That claim has now been adjudicated by a court of law and found to be, at least in significant part, built on systematic misrepresentation. Future historians writing about this era will not lead with the towers. They will not lead with the rallies. They will lead with the fraud finding. They will write about a business empire that maintained its image of success through years of lying to banks and insurers, and about the legal reckoning that eventually forced the truth into the open. And here is the question that I want to leave you with, because it is the question that should concern every American, regardless of where you stand politically. We are watching a man who is simultaneously under court supervision for massive financial fraud and actively seeking to return to the presidency of the United States. He wants control of the federal budget, the regulatory apparatus, the Justice Department, the agencies that oversee financial markets and banking, all while his own financial house is being managed by court-appointed monitors because he cannot be trusted to manage it himself without committing fraud. That is not a partisan observation. That is a factual description of the situation as it exists right now in 2026, and it deserves to be named clearly and loudly. Can a man this consumed by his own financial survival, this entangled in legal obligations and court restrictions, effectively govern the most complex economy in human history? Can someone whose business model was built on telling different stories to different audiences, depending on what benefited him most, be trusted to tell the American people the truth about the state of their country? These are not rhetorical attacks. They are genuine, serious questions that the American voter deserves to sit with before making decisions about who holds power. I have covered Washington for more than 2 decades. I have watched politicians survive things that should have ended them. I have watched institutions fail people who deserved better. I have learned not to make confident predictions about how stories end. But I will say this with complete certainty: what has been revealed inside Trump's account, what the courts have documented about how his empire actually functioned, is one of the most significant accountability moments in modern American political history. The myth is cracking. The numbers are telling a different story than the one on the towers. And the truth, once it is in the court record, does not disappear no matter how loud the noise gets. That is the story. That is what changed everything. If this video gave you something, clarity, context, a framework for understanding what is actually happening beyond the headlines, then do 3 things right now, like this video, so that other people can find it. Share it with someone who needs the full picture, and subscribe to US Focus, because we are going to keep following this story every step of the way, and there are chapters ahead that are going to be even more consequential than what we covered today. The truth is the most powerful thing we have to help us spread it.